It all began with a question that froze the entire chamber in stunned silence. The camera slowly pans toward Representative Ilhan Omar, leaning forward with her trademark intensity, her tone calm but her words landing like a thunderclap. Do you know of any employer that decreases pay for employees? For a moment, no one moves. You can hear the faint shuffle of papers, a cough in the distance, the kind of awkward silence that fills a room when someone says something so disconnected from reality that even seasoned lawmakers aren't sure how to respond. It wasn't just a question, it was a revelation, a glimpse into how distant some in Washington have become from the real world where ordinary Americans live, work, and fight to earn every cent. The shock rippled through the room. Some looked down at their notes, others exchanged uncertain glances, almost wondering if Omar was being rhetorical. But she wasn't, she was serious. Her tone carried conviction, but her understanding of how businesses function seemed to collapse under the weight of her own question. It was the kind of moment that defines hearings, when ideology collides head-on with experience, and only one survives. Representative O'Neill, calm yet assertive, leaned in to respond, and with just a few words dismantled the entire illusion. I owned a business, she said plainly, her voice steady, her expression unbothered. That simple line carried the weight of real-world experience. Years of payrolls, performance reviews, and responsibility that Omar's words had so clearly missed. O'Neill continued, explaining how productivity and accountability go hand in hand, how a company simply cannot survive if poor performance is rewarded. Her delivery was professional but firm, like a teacher explaining to a student what should have been common knowledge. The tone of the hearing shifted immediately. The tension that had filled the air moments earlier began to morph into a quiet understanding among the rest of the room. This was no longer about political philosophy. This was about reality. The private sector doesn't pay for potential. It pays for performance. Omar, however, seemed caught between confusion and disbelief. Her words stumbled slightly as she tried to clarify that she had worked in the private sector before, and yet the confusion deepened the more she spoke. The camera zoomed in subtly, her face composed, but her eyes searching for footing in a discussion she no longer controlled. Representative Anile Hudson then took the floor, her tone controlled yet precise, walking through examples from her time running a tile-setting company. She explained how, in the real world, an employee's pay could be reduced for underperformance, probation, or violation. How productivity determines not just reward, but survival. It wasn't an attack. It was an education. You could almost feel the shift in energy. The audience leaning forward, recognizing that they were witnessing not just a hearing, but a lesson. Hudson spoke with the calm authority of someone who has signed paychecks and faced the weight of leadership. Someone who has been there, not theorized it. Omar's earlier question, once sounding bold, now seemed painfully naive. The camera cuts briefly to the audience, expressions ranging from disbelief to quiet amusement. The contrast was stark, one lawmaker speaking from lived experience, another lost in theory. Then Representative Uglum entered, his voice measured but direct, explaining how commission-based pay works, how in sales, real estate, and trades, performance dictates income. No sales, no earnings. His words landed with the kind of precision that silences a room. There was no emotion, no grandstanding, just the blunt truth of economic reality. Each sentence was a quiet correction to the misunderstanding that had just unfolded. And yet, the most powerful part of this exchange wasn't aggression. It was the calmness of reason standing against the fog of political abstraction. The more they spoke, the clearer it became that Omar's worldview was colliding with something she couldn't quite argue against. Facts. You could see it in her posture, still upright but uneasy, as if realizing that her question had opened a door she wasn't prepared to walk through. The discussion became a masterclass in the divide between those who manage budgets and those who manage rhetoric. Hudson, O'Neill, and Uglum weren't just defending capitalism. They were defending fairness, the universal truth that reward follows responsibility. Their examples cut through ideology like sunlight through fog. Hudson spoke about productivity metrics, O'Neill about leadership accountability, Uglum about commission logic, all echoing one central truth: effort matters. Meanwhile, Omar's insistence that commission pay was different only deepened the divide. Her argument began to sound less like a policy position and more like a confession of disconnect. The hearing room transformed into a live-action civics lesson, an unintentional documentary on how distant political narratives have drifted from working-class reality. By now, even the audience knew the debate had moved beyond words. It had become symbolic. The private sector versus the political bubble, results versus rhetoric. The camera lingers on Omar again, her expression unreadable, perhaps thinking, perhaps realizing that this wasn't going the way she'd hoped. Her colleagues' responses weren't just dismantling her argument. They were exposing an uncomfortable truth, that too many lawmakers make sweeping claims about systems they've never been part of. The longer it went on, the clearer the contrast became. Those who live in the rhythm of profit and loss versus those insulated by taxpayer guarantees. The moment Hudson spoke about performance-based pay not being punishment but reflection, a murmur ran through the room, a mix of agreement and quiet applause. It wasn't dramatic. It was dignified. The truth didn't need theatrics. It stood tall on its own. The clip would soon spread across the internet, millions watching, captioned with words like Ilhan Omar schooled on economics and reality hits Congress hard. And it's easy to see why. What started as a routine exchange became a defining viral moment. A raw, unfiltered collision between political theory and lived experience. The more you watch it, the more you feel the weight of that silence after her question. The uneasy pause before O'Neill answered, the calm authority in Hudson's tone, and the collective realization in the room that common sense had just reclaimed the floor. It wasn't about party lines or ideology anymore. It was about something deeper, the understanding that effort, accountability, and results are not negotiable principles. They are the backbone of every functioning society. By the end, Omar's question had turned into a metaphor for a larger issue. How far removed Washington has become from the people it governs. The hearing may have ended, but its echo lingers. A stark reminder that no matter how many speeches are made in marble halls, the laws of hard work and merit still speak louder than politics. The camera fades as the chair calls the next item, but the audience, both in the room and online, already knows what they just witnessed. A live demonstration of how truth sounds when spoken by those who've lived it, and how silence falls when ideology runs out of words.